Because their large crankshaft broke again, the imported parts in Pakistan are still very expensive. In order to minimize the loss this time, the owner did not hesitate to send it to the repair shop. It was prepared to spend 5,000 rupees to splice it together. Considering the length of the crankshaft after splicing, Fu first had to record the original size to avoid the crankshaft being too short after welding. For this kind of crankshaft with a relatively large outer diameter, the shaft is smooth with the help of the lathe center frame. The concentricity of the subsequent splicing will not be affected. Of course, this is the repair of the crankshaft. The splicing method is consistent with the unpowered rear axle of the truck. That is, the shaft rod is docked twice through the center hole. In order to make the force-bearing surface of the hole larger, the hole is punched with a large drill bit. The hole cutter needs to be used to continue to expand the process. It can remove the burrs remaining on the inner wall and make the hole diameter equal to half of the shaft rod. When the parts outside the hole need to be welded, the section needs to be cut into a groove to increase the area of welding rod welding. Then a scrapped half shaft is used for docking. On the premise that the entire outer diameter is different from the hole diameter, the surface of the shaft needs to be cut by a lathe. The depth of the hole is the processing standard. A slot cutter is used to cut off the tail of the scrapped half shaft. This is the key to splicing the crankshaft hole. After the master successfully split it into two, the metal connector with completely consistent hole diameter data should be completely knocked to the bottom of the hole with a valve head. The valley will not affect the gas strength, considering that the splicing method with consistent splicing on both sides is not strong enough. The metal surface of the connected metal should be processed with threads. The threaded docking will not affect the position of the bent handle. Under the very skilled operation of the master, the bent handle end can be processed, on the premise that the bent handle will not touch the lathe when rotating. In order to avoid the off-axis bent handle affecting the rotation, Fu also needs to weld a load on the tail to ensure that the bent shaft can maintain balance on the lathe. Then the surface layer of the entire end face is directly removed. The pin will lose a certain length, which can be compensated by the docked metal later. With the fixed hole diameter data above, Fu only needs to pay attention to the depth of the drill hole. After all, wrapping will affect the final effect. After the end face and the mark on the drill bit coincide, the depth reaches the standard of splicing. Because this end needs to be threaded, it is also necessary to cut the same thread on the inner wall according to the pitch of the spliced round steel to avoid the occurrence of ore when the thread is connected. After the master quickly processes the crank end, the shaft can be rotated and connected. Although the reserved thread of the spliced round rod is relatively long, the internal thread does not have any jamming. After the grooves at both ends are completely fitted, the master still needs to use a tape measure to measure the length after splicing. When the data and concentricity are not affected, the groove is filled with welding rods. Because the welding area occupies half of the end face, in order to prevent the internal round rod from breaking, it is necessary to use welding rods with high ductility and hardness to ensure that the crankshaft can still withstand the internal torque. Then use the turning tool to cut the hammer. The main purpose is to be extremely flat on the shaft surface to prevent the crank from being installed and used normally. In order to make the rough cutting surface smoother, the grinding machine needs to be repeatedly polished until the surface is smooth and flat. The broken crankshaft has been spliced. What do you think of the skills of the Pakistani master?